We're quite capable, right, Arthur?
Even though Joe knows, some of us also know.
We know a little bit. You do about this, what we're talking about today. And we actually did this uh, webinar once before. And what we're talking about today, this is for any of you out there who are in the summer in particular. We gear up to do projects around our home, on our properties, and sometimes we'll hire that out. Now, sometimes we'll hire formal contractors and construction companies, and sometimes we'll hire casual labor, someone who maybe, as a matter of fact, is, a teacher, but they're off for the summer. So they're doing this contract work on the side throughout their summer months while they're away from their teaching job. Or it could be someone who's just decided to just start up and be a handyman, and do some extra work on the side. And what you need to know in terms of the scope of New York State workers' compensation as it applies to you, the contractor, as well as it applies to you, the homeowner, or if you're having work done on your property, you need to know what's to follow. So I'm going to turn this over quickly to Arthur, but know that I'm monitoring, and I can take, using my cell phone, I can take your questions. If you have any questions, XYZ, does this apply? Arthur, what you're talking about, does this apply? And so on and so forth. So I'll take those questions. I'll put them to Arthur if you have them. So this is your chance. Free legal advice, right? Very helpful and could save you a lot of headache, hassle, money, and certainly litigation. So with that, Arthur, let me turn it over to you, and then you can give me a heads up when you want me to refer to your slide information.
Okay. First of all, I'm going to issue a disclaimer. If I don't know the answer to your question, I'll get back to you with the answer. What I'd like to do is give you some details and some generalizations, both regarding how the New York State workers' compensation system works. That way you will understand the importance of having coverage when coverage is required. New York has what's considered to be a no-fault workers' compensation system. It's been in place for more than a century. And what the plan is structured to do is to give no-fault coverage to certain covered workers at the expense of their employer, so as to pass that expense throughout the economy. In other words, the cost of insuring these people that are intended to be covered is baked into the expenses of a business, and it's passed on as a business expense, and it's shown in the price they charge for their work. So immediately what comes to mind is, I'll bet you that people that don't cover their employees are not participating in this plan, and that's what occurs. So what does workers' compensation do? It provides benefits for medical care of a covered worker. It's medical, dental, surgical, optometry, necessary drugs, and assistive devices that are causally related and medically necessary to the injury that occurred on the job. Other than emergency cases, big jobs, big treatment, expensive treatment has to be authorized in advance. If there's an emergency, you're still entitled to care, and the doctor and the workers' comp carrier for the employer can figure it out later. Workers' comp also provides lost wage benefits. Now, what has to occur there is your average weekly wage is determined by how much money you made at this employment for the year prior to your injury. If you weren't there for an entire year, you look at a similar worker's payroll and determine what your average weekly wage is. 2/3 of that amount is your total indemnity or lost wage benefit. It's 2/3 because it's not taxed. When you are impaired, you are paid a percentage of that total rate based upon the level of impairment determined by the judge. The judge takes into consideration your doctor's opinion as well as the insurance company's opinion on your temporary impairment rates. Now, there are some people that get paid a lot of money in New York. So they've established a weekly maximum rate. If you make $3,000 or $4,000 a week, you're not going to get paid 2/3 of that amount. You're going to be paid up to $1,171.46 is your maximum rate if you were injured after July 1st, 2024. The year prior to that, the maximum rate was $1,145.43. Okay, so when are you covered? When's an employee covered? An employee is a person who works for another could be a company or an individual, under the supervision, direction, and control of the employer, either on or off their premises. So you could work in a factory, you could report to a work site, then work off site. There's all different varieties of employees that are covered.
Should I share at this point, Arthur? Is it too soon to share that, or is
no,
is that you want me to
sure,
get it
put it
up?
right up.
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
all
right
right,
up.
will do. Okay,
Yep.
go ahead. You can proceed. Sorry.
You can be part-time, full-time, temporary, seasonal, casual, day labor, leased, borrowed, unpaid, volunteers, family members, anybody. So we're a couple of slides down.
All right, gotcha.
All right. However, the workers' compensation law sets out whether or not there are parties that are exempt. And we'll get to those in a few minutes, okay?
Okay.
A sole proprietor is not required to insure himself, but he may. If a sole proprietor has employees, he must insure them, and he may insure himself. There are certainly independent contractors who want to keep their costs down and do not go out and voluntarily insure themselves. And then they regret it when they break their leg on the job when they're working by themselves, and they may not have good health care. Workers' compensation medical benefits do not require you to pay any kind of a fee. There's no deductibles. There's nothing. There's no expense to them. So you would like to have workers' compensation medical benefits whenever you can, which is why some sole proprietors do elect to pay for workers' compensation coverage. There's very particular rules when you get into a LLC or a closely held corporation, and there's only one or two owners with no employees. That is more of an optional coverage situation. What happens when you don't insure your employees is pretty brutal. There are criminal penalties and there are civil penalties. It's actually a misdemeanor to have staff that work for you that are covered employees who are not insured. It is also grounds for a civil penalty, and as the slide shows, it's steep. It's $2,000 a day for each 10-day period of noncompliance. What happens to the employer in an uninsured situation is expensive. It is potentially ends up with a criminal record. You could find yourself disbarred from doing any state or public work projects. It's very serious business. So anyone that has covered workers on the payroll, people that work under their supervision, direction, and control, should look at a way to obtain insurance affordably and to include it in your pricing. Your insurance can be purchased from an insurance company. If you're high risk, a lot of employers go to the state insurance fund. Or if you're a big enough company, companies do solicit approval as a self-insured entity through the Workers' Compensation Board. There are many categories of workers that are not covered workers. Independent contractors in particular, and you run into them a lot during the summer, sometimes during the winter as well, but during the summer particularly, you'll find a lone painter, landscaper, etc. So any worker who worked for a general contractor, whether they are employed directly by the general contractor or they are alleged to be a independent contractor, is first presumed to be an employee and therefore needs to be insured by the general contractor.
Okay, so even if the whole company's not showing up, this one worker is showing up and they were hired through a GC of some kind, that GC has got to have the workers' comp coverage for that employee.
Unless that general contractor can go through an extensive checklist of items to show that this individual who he or she is saying is an independent contractor is actually an independent contractor.
As opposed to an employee of I see, I got you.
Right, so you're presumed to be an employee. So we had a client who fell off a ladder, broke both legs. He was working for a contractor who was the sub to a general contractor on a home improvement job. And the contractor that hired this individual hired him allegedly as an independent contracting worker. So you've got layers. You've got the guy actually pounding the nails was alleged to be an independent contractor carpenter. You've got the contractor that hired him who was a remodeler. And then you have a general contractor that was basically rebuilding this entire house. So it became a battle of who was what.
Right.
It's presumed that the carpenter with the hammer in his hand is an employee and not an independent contractor. Of course, when you get into these situations, you have an injured party and no one wants to pay for them. So everyone tries to fight their way out of the bag. Okay.
So if I'm a general contractor, I can hire someone as an independent, not as an employee.
Yes, if you're a general contractor, you could have several independent contractors who you don't need to cover because they're independent.
And the burden of proof is on you to if that worker is injured on a job that you have them on, even though they're not an employee, you have to demonstrate you hired them as an independent contractor. What does that demonstration look like?
Here you go. The individual is free from control and direction in performing the job. The individual is performing services outside the usual course of the business of the general contractor that employed them. The individual is engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business that is similar to the service they're performing on this particular job. Then if those are true, then there's a 12-point extensive test. You've got to have you have to be registered as an independent business. You have to have logos on your truck. You've got to have your own equipment. Many criteria and indicia of independence.
So, right, it shows that, look, this person is not wholly obligated to this one contractor and they do work on their own. They do work for other GCs, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Now that independent contractor may have employees, and that independent contractor is beholden to his employees to insure them. What happens though is you find these smaller contractors to keep their costs down. We'll have a worker sign a little piece of paper that says, "My name is John Smith. I'm an independent contractor." Then he thinks he has the defense to workers' compensation coverage. But then he tells John Smith, "You come to work at 8:30, you leave at
Right,
5.
he dictates everything for that person.
You use all my
so he works
tools.
for
You
him.
pound the nails
Yeah.
where I tell you to pound the nail. You follow my instruction. You don't move unless I tell you to move." That's direction, control, and supervision. So he's actually an employee and he has to be covered.
Gotcha.
That's the distinction. So it's
Gotcha.
a level of independence. And that comes into play in a few of these scenarios down the road.
Now, when you have cases on with situations like this, like with this gentleman that, he's the carpenter, et cetera. I mean, you've been in the thick of it. It does get nitty gritty. You got 12 points of beyond the initial, et cetera. I mean, can you see it are there circumstances where it is gray most of the time, or do these resolve themselves pretty readily?
No, they usually always go to trial.
They do.
Because no one wants to concede and no one wants to be considered or found to be an uninsured employer because the penalties that we covered a minute ago are so severe.
So it's worth it to go and try and fight it to win
Yeah.
regardless.
And then, and not only for that reason, but there's a third party that comes in. It's called the uninsured employers fund. If someone is injured and they're an employee and the employer is not insured, the UEF comes in. It's a state agency, and they would pay for that uninsured worker's medical expenses, but they are tough. So you've got the small time contractor who has bid the job with the general contractor. He has two laborers that work for him, and he runs around to a couple other jobs while he leaves his two laborers there who signed the form that said, we're experienced carpenters, we're independent contractors. Okay, you follow the scenario, 3 levels?
Yes. Yeah.
Someone falls off a ladder, there's huge injuries, there's big bills, they're not insured because the independent contractor who hired the two laborers who are the falsely stated to be independent contractors have no coverage. It's trouble. So the UEF comes in and they want to prove that someone lied, that someone's guilty of having employees who weren't covered and potentially owe a civil penalty, potentially have criminal ramifications, and they personally owe all of the benefits that we talked about in the beginning, the lost wages and the medical benefits. You have to pay for that personally if you're not insured properly as an employer. So it's a mess.
And I'm sure you've seen it all. I'm sure you've
Yeah,
seen
we run into 2 or 3 of those every year, and it's a real battle. Let's move on.
Okay.
There are other exclusions from workers' compensation coverage besides independent contractors. There are a lot of considerations that are given to homeowners because homeowners sometimes get stuck in the middle of these battles, and it's not
right.
pleasant. Okay. So if you hire a tradesman who would normally be deemed to be an independent contractor and they're working at your home, that's one more criteria that you're meeting that they're uncovered, okay, because they're working at your home. There are also exclusions for household employees called casual labor or domestic workers. So first, let's talk about what casual labor is. Casual labor is defined to be workers who work irregularly, not on a schedule, not under your direct supervision and control, typically doing yard work, household chores, making repairs, painting at your one family owner occupied dwelling. They are not employees, and because they're at your home, they are not covered employees. Remember when I went over the list of covered employees earlier, I included casual labor. But when casual labor when casual laborers are working at your home, they're not covered. Similarly, there's an exemption for domestic workers. Domestic workers are exempt when they're working at your home for under 40 hours a week.
So if someone's coming in to clean the house once a week or twice a month or whatever, that they don't fall under this.
They're not covered. That's correct.
Right.
Workers' compensation coverage is required if this domestic worker is employed for more than 40 hours per week by the same employer. Now, if you have a live-in, they can attribute some of that overnight time to the hour calculation as well. So what you find is with any area of insurance, there's a battle to prove that you're entitled to coverage. And of course, the insurance companies battle to prove that there is no coverage. And that becomes expensive. Of course, you don't pay for it if you are an employee because of workers' comp, the employee doesn't pay us. We get paid out of whatever we obtain for them in terms of an award. It's a lengthy period of time, but fortunately in New York, it's a no-fault system. So oftentimes you do get your medical care while the battle rages. Now, people ask, now that it's the season to start hiring people to do your work, what do I do about these contractors now that you've scared me about potentially being an employer of an injured worker? You have to ask. So everyone knows that it's going to cost a little bit more to hire someone that has insurance coverage than someone who doesn't. And you ought to ask your contractor if they have the required coverages that a business should have. And those include workers' compensation and general liability. Workers' compensation, we've already gone over why you want to have them have coverage so that it's not an issue for you to prove that you have coverage. You could have coverage through your homeowner's policy, but everyone probably also knows that the more claims you have, the more your premium is going to be. So
Right.
I'm going to go backwards for 1 second.
Okay.
Because there are issues when an uncovered worker, no, you had the right screen. I'm sorry.
Oh, I did. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
It says homeowner liability insurance may include coverage against liability, 3420. Because this is so gray, what happens sometimes is you employ a person you think is a casual worker on the basis that they are going to be an irregular hour helper under 40 hours, doing things for you sporadically without much direction and control, and therefore they're uncovered. But there's a lot of cases because you're fighting with insurance companies where they are elevated to becoming a worker that is entitled to workers' compensation coverage, and you never expected that. Well, fortunately in New York, insurance companies are required to give you an endorsement under section 3420, where, this is very specific, notwithstanding any other provision of this chapter or any other laws to the contrary, every policy providing comprehensive personal liability insurance on a 1, 2, 3, or 4 family owner-occupied dwelling issued or delivered in this state on and after March 1984 shall provide for coverage against liability for the payment of obligations which the policyholder may incur pursuant to the provisions of the workers' compensation law to an employee arising out of and in the course of employment of less than 40 hours per week in and about such residence of the policyholder. What that means is this. This does not create a new class of people to be insured. It simply means that if a person is entitled to workers' comp because you employed them at your home, they have coverage. When you hired them, you didn't think you were cheating the system. You didn't do it to cheat the system. You just hired someone who fit the role of a casual worker at my house. Things developed into a more regular relationship. They started coming every week. They started to use power tools that you owned. They did something that elevated them into the class of workers that need to be covered, and you have this protection. So that's a great thing to have in New York. I don't think it's required in all states, but it's available at an extra premium charge. So
you have to elect that with your insurance provider.
You should make sure you have it.
Okay.
It has to be offered to everybody.
Gotcha.
You should make sure you've got it. Okay.
Gotcha.
Now let's go back to these contractors. So you've got that covered, but you've got more work than that going on. You've got regular work being done at your house or a big project. You should ask your contractor, you want evidence of workers' compensation coverage for all of his workers. You want to make sure if he's a general contractor that his subcontractors have coverage for all of their workers. Because this goes uphill. If there's an injured worker, someone's got to pay those bills, and it's a battle to see who has coverage. If the immediate employer doesn't have it, it goes to the contractor above that one. It goes to the closest to the injured worker up the food chain. But someone's got to have coverage. They should also have general liability coverage because you've got workers coming onto your lawn that may cut down a tree that lands on your neighbor's house. You want to have their general liability coverage cover that, not something to do with your homeowner's insurance. So those are the two types of policies you really should insist on from your general contractor, or realize that the price you're getting that is so much cheaper than every insured general contractor is probably a result in part due to the fact that the guy you're talking to or woman you're talking to is not insured, and therefore there's risk.
So as an example,
Yes,
if I have a handyman that came and fixed one thing, a
Yep.
broken pane of glass,
yes.
and then, oh,
He's
he
not
did
a
such a
covered
good,
employee. He's not a covered
Right.
employee.
right, but he did such a good job that then I had him back to replace the door. And then he came back a couple weeks later and now it's sporadic enough where he's not there necessarily every single week or a certain number of hours, and he's working for many other people, et cetera, et cetera. Me as the homeowner, he gets hurt the next time on my property. Me as the homeowner, what is my obligation?
You're going to get into potentially a battle between your insurance company that has coverage under 3420 and doesn't want to pay. The uninsured employer's fund may be in there because your coverage is being denied from your homeowner's carrier, because you may have elevated this individual from a casual laborer to a regular laborer who requires coverage, and they may fight the coverage based on the way you've acted. Insurance companies don't like paying for
Well,
care.
right. That's what they're there for, but they don't like doing
They
what they're there for.
don't like to pay. That's exactly right. Yeah. If the person is someone who deserves workers' comp, then that homeowner's policy should be paying for your end of the workers' compensation expense. Does that answer your question or no?
It does. I think it's still, I think probably for a lot of people, and it probably within the system is too, is it, because he worked at my house 6 hours this week and 2 hours 2 weeks from now, does that make him, like, at what point is he elevated to, because this is a real situation. I have someone
Right.
who comes to my home, fairly regularly, maybe two, 3 times a month, something like that, to fix something or to help with something or something like that. And I didn't ask. I've never asked, does he have?
Sure. So those people are the kind of people that are covered by this homeowner's endorsement, because
Okay.
they're either not covered because they're so sporadic, or they've been elevated to become covered, and you have protection under this paragraph.
I see. Okay.
So that paragraph's there.
Yep. Okay.
You are
That 3420 this
Yeah.
this year, this 3420.
Domestic workers are a little bit different. Once domestic workers get over 40 hours, you've got to insure them under a specific workers' compensation coverage plan, and you've got to provide them with disability and paid family leave benefits under a separate policy. So once they go over 40 hours, they become covered employees. So what general questions does this give rise to?
I think that, well, even on like this last one, for example, disability and paid family leave, et cetera, all of that stuff again is probably for someone, as you pointed out, or let's say, Airbnb is a big thing now for people. So if you've got a couple who, I know my realtor and his girlfriend were just out looking at Airbnb properties, they're going to start investing in them, et cetera. He's a realtor, they're not, right, but they're going to do this whole side line of cash flow with investment properties. So if you've got investment properties and you've got a cleaning crew or crews that are regularly responsible for taking care of all of your properties, you might be an individual homeowner who has a couple of Airbnbs, but you need to have that line is 40 hours.
No, keep in mind, I said owner occupied.
Owner occupied.
Those exemptions that remove these people from the category of covered employee, that exclusion is contingent upon the work being at your owner occupied.
Right, so now let's take it
Residence.
into Airbnbs because it is so prevalent these days.
That's an investment property, so you don't enjoy that protection. So you may be employing someone, and you may need to have coverage.
Because I would think a lot that applies to a lot of people these days. There are a lot of folks who have investment properties, 1, 2, 4, whatever it might be. And they've got handymen in and out of there, and they've got cleaning crews and lawn crews, and
Right, so
they're
here's a distinction. Let's go back to what I had said earlier about independent contractors. You're more than welcome. You own a bed and breakfast, and you're not in your owner occupied dwelling. You're in your investment property. So you're a landlord, right?
right,
On a different basis than
for lack of a better term, right? Yeah.
So that's an investment property. You don't enjoy the owner occupied exemption. You're hiring people. Now, if you hire independent contractors, they're on their own in life. They need to insure themselves if they wish. They need to go forward without insurance. If they hire a couple of laborers to work for them, they have to insure those people as employees. So you're fine hiring them. If they start coming in with a crew, you should say to them, where is your workers' compensation coverage for your employees? If it's one person who's an independent contractor and he works alone, he's on his own. But if he brings a crew in here, that is now an independent contractor with employees, and you ought to make sure he has coverage. If he doesn't have coverage, then there's going to be trouble if one of his people are injured. And you don't enjoy the occupied home exemption because you're in your investment property.
So now let's, on the flip side, we talked homeowner a little bit. Let's just talk briefly about if you're that independent contractor, and you touched on this earlier, but let's say you're that teacher that's just for the summer months, a couple months, gonna do some side painting jobs or a roofing job or handyman job. And you're going to do this probably, who knows if it'll be 20 hours getting started, who knows, I mean, if I'm that teacher and I'm going to just do this for the summer, what do I need to do next?
Okay, you're describing an independent contractor in the painting business. So he or she are okay for themselves. They then say, it's getting busy, I'm more popular than I thought, I'm going to hire a couple of people. Now they're an employer. So now they've got people to worry about. They have people that they're obligated to take care of.
Right. Now for themselves, if they were to get hurt on a job as an independent contractor, just so I'm clear, ultimately they can say, I'm an independent contractor, I got hurt on this job. And what happens next? Like what?
They're on their own with whatever healthcare plan they have, or they may elect to go out and insure themselves
and get a workers' comp insurance.
Right. We've had cases where a one-man band is out there working, and he's fine until he falls off a ladder working by himself and breaks his leg, and now he finds himself with bills to pay, deductibles to pay, co-insurance to pay, and he says, well, I got hurt at work. Tough. You didn't go insure yourself with the voluntary workers' compensation coverage. You have your health insurance. That's what you got.
What to have, and I know that you're not in the insurance business, but you had to have seen enough of this art to give some anecdotal information about it. What to even, because we don't have an insurance broker on with us today. But if I'm contemplating side work and I want to do the full protection of myself, my family, my employment, etc. Because if you get hurt bad enough, you're not going back to teaching in the fall, right? So what costs are associated typically with a premium such as this?
It depends upon your experience. And by experience, I mean your loss experience. the volume of work that you do and whether or not you have employees. So I couldn't give you a figure. I want to
Gotcha.
go back to one thing that I should have mentioned. Keep
Okay.
in mind that workers' compensation affords you medical benefits without the payment of a deductible or a copay. It also gives you financial benefit for your lost wage, which your health coverage does not. So when you've fallen off that ladder as the independent painter and you can't work all summer, theoretically you'd be entitled to some lost wages, which is a nice benefit.
Right, 2/3 with a maximum
Yeah,
ceiling,
yeah,
like you said,
right,
up to the 1,100,
right.
whatever it is. So,
So
yeah.
go back to the very first thing that we talked about. It's no fault coverage, but there's an expense to it. And the reason they set it up this way is that the cost of insuring all of the insurable workers in New York is baked into the expense structure of the legitimate economy. So sure, it costs something, but it's spread across many, many, many businesses with many, 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 many workers. So it's there, it's an expense. If everyone had it, it would probably be cheaper, but they don't all have it.
Gotcha. So this is again, and you pointed it out earlier, this is something you can pick up the phone and call or get online and find a brokerage, an insurance brokerage, a firm that sells workers' comp
Whoever,
insurance.
yeah, whoever insured your house and your car can either sell you workers' compensation insurance or put you in touch with a friend or an associate. They can refer you to somebody else. Yeah.
Right, right.
And
Well, any final points or things that you want to touch on here before we wrap up then? I'm sorry that Joe is in court and we weren't real sure whether he was going to make it or not. Although that was a surprise last minute to Arthur. He
yeah,
said, "What do you mean I'm
yeah,
flying solo?"
that's
So,
all
but
right.
you did great, Arthur.
Well,
And
I'm sure Joe's making some money for somebody if he's in court. So
so we're going to put that that Word document, we're going to put that in a quick blog post on the Joe Knows blog on at stanleylawoffices.com. So you can reference back to those notes if you have questions, or if this is on replay for someone, you know, of someone who got hurt or is out there starting a contracting business and maybe is looking to try and cut costs, etc. You can share this with them, send them to that document at stanleylawoffices.com. I'll put that up today so that you can all reference Arthur's notes. And then Arthur, if someone has questions for you and wants to reach out to you, how do they get a hold of you?
they just call me at the office. I think the number's right above your head.
Yes,
Yeah.
608-3333. So
There you go.
Arthur is dedicated specifically to workers' compensation. Arthur, how many years have you been?
2005, I think, 2004, 2005.
Okay, so 2 decades.
Yeah.
And Arthur works with Megan Fallon and Sheila Fallon and their paralegals who are all, I mean, this is all they do is workers' compensation. So if you have the opportunity to check out some of the online reviews for this team, the workers' comp team at Stanley Law, unbelievable. Sherry, Bill, everyone that works over there, Amy, they do incredible work. They know their stuff. Arthur, you can attest, workers' comp, as Megan always says, it's about dotting the i's and crossing the t's.
Certainly.
Very, very, very specific.
It
So
is.
if you have been hurt and you're thinking about trying to go it alone, yeah, like
It's
Arthur's
hard.
phone.
It's very difficult.
Phone.
There's a lot of nuance to workers' compensation.
A
Very
lot of
difficult.
deadlines, a lot of paperwork, and it's above most people's heads, and it's very easy to mess it up. It's very easy to miss a deadline or do something incorrectly. You know, also, here's another big point for them, Arthur, really important. If you're hurt and you think there's, you know, you got to go to the doctors, etc. You need to be telling them, right, that this is a potential workers' comp claim. Walk us through
Well,
that briefly, if you could, how to make sure that you're doing the right thing when it comes to your medical care.
when you seek medical attention due to a workers' compensation injury, you always tell the provider it is your opinion it's compensable through a workers' comp. You always tell them that, because some doctors won't take workers' comp claims, and some doctors shouldn't take workers' comp clients because they aren't experienced in the jargon of the workers' compensation system.
Right, because the doctors have to be compliant with certain things in the care of
No question. There's jargon to prove that an injury is causally connected to your injury. There's jargon regarding levels of your impairment and your total impairment eventually down the road. There are treatment guidelines. And if a doctor is stumbling through the system and just doing things willy-nilly, because remember when I started, I said, other than emergency care, things need to be authorized. If you're your doctor performing services without authorization, he or she won't get paid. And then they're not going to want to remain your provider. And you're going to be stuck with your providers in the middle of everything. You don't want to do that. You want to be very upfront with your doctor. It's a workers' comp.
Interesting. So there's a little check mark on there. But even the little check mark, make sure you have those conversations throughout, right? Because sometimes that stuff gets overlooked. And I'm sure you've gone through this where you're putting together a case and you go back and something wasn't, the T wasn't crossed, the I wasn't dotted, and it makes work and the case itself a lot more difficult to prove.
It happens more than you want it to. And I had a very recent case, which is turning into somewhat of a disaster. This man was rear-ended, and he didn't tell his dentist that he was involved in a car accident or a car accident when he was at work. And he had dental issues. So the dentist saw him, commenced some work, and then he got put to task on whether or not the dental work was causally related to the injury, and he just dropped the guy like a hot potato. Didn't want to be involved in workers' compensation. So we have lost the ability to have evidence that this dental work was all done because of the car accident, which occurred at work. It's just
right. So he was in a car accident while at work and had issues relating to his teeth, went and got the work done, didn't indicate that ahead of time. And now he's out a dentist and the bills.
Right.
And the money.
It's a mess.
Oh.
Absolute mess.
I tell this to Joe because Joe's writing a book, I'm working with him on writing a book. And you got it. You and Megan and Sheila, you should write a book because the stories that I've heard, and it's just, and some of it's really, really good stories, and hardworking people, and they do get the award they deserve. They do get the maximum and it works out for them. But so often, there's just so many ways to trip up, I guess, especially if you don't have.
There's nothing worse than hearing the stories of a hard worker who is injured through no fault of their own, who are trying to live with their family at 2/3 of their old rate with no prospect of going back to the work that they used to do because they're not vocationally able to do work that is less physical. They're a physical worker their whole life. They never used a computer. They're okay on a telephone. If it's like a landline, they get confused over even an iPhone.
But they've been running a lift, they've been in a manufacturing, whatever, or on construction, and forget it.
55, 60 years old, too old of a dog to learn new tricks.
Yeah.
And they're told you can't go back to any of that. And now you're fighting over a permanency award. But there's no better feeling when you get it for them.
I mean, that's right.
They've gone through 2-3 years of care. They've struggled. All of a sudden, at the end of the rainbow, there is a pot, maybe not full of gold, but it's got something in it.
It's got something, right? I mean, and Joe says that, right? Your life never goes back to, you don't fully ever regain all of that. And as many people, as you've worked with over the years, I would say probably close to 100% of them would say that they would take their well-being back.
Always.
Over any kind of cash.
Always. Well, keep in mind, we're talking about a construction worker who during the summer probably makes 5 times what those maximum awards would equate to. Because he's working overtime, he's working 60, 70 hours a week. Right. Now he's got to live on 2/3 of that maximum rate of, I don't know, $1,200.
Right, 1,100 something.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Well, and nowadays in the economy, that 1,100 a week I mean, that's almost poverty yet, right? Because
Your,
the
your wife,
rising cost of everything.
your wife unretires very quickly when that happens.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Arthur, thank you again so
Sure.
much. You can reach out to info@stanleylawoffices.com. Please check out our reviews. This is going to be up for replay on YouTube and on the website itself. And again, specifically Arthur's notes that we used to walk through that you saw all of the reference points today, that will be posted up there as well for your access and for your sharing. Thank you all for being with us, and we'll see you again soon on our next webinar. You take care. Be safe out there, Arthur.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.